and actually, which many admire, such as the koala, wombat, and of course, the kangaroo.
Yeah, sure. People admire koalas. I can tell that in my day-to-day conversations with people calling me a chlamydia-ridden koala. No, that they're admired, I swear.
I know this isn't the first time I've asked you to do this, but just take a second to imagine that you've been transported back in time.
Okay, how far back? Am I being burned for being a witch? Are we dying of the plague? You know, what time frame are we talking?
And it can be pretty much any time, as long as you
Oh.
make sure to pick a point when prehistoric beasts and
Oh.
creatures were mucking about.
Yeah, okay. I was not thinking the same. Okay. I don't think I know enough about prehistoric beasts to pick a good time frame. But this just gives me an excuse to watch more of these videos, so you know.
Okay, now that you've done that, I want you to picture the worst possible thing you could run into back then. Got it?
No. I feel like I still don't know enough. It's really big and has a lot of teeth.
Well, unfortunately I cannot use observation hockey to guess the exact animal you picked, but I will guess that you picked something that's an absolute unit, at least compared to us.
Yeah.
After all, this is what so many people love about prehistory. It's home to massive creatures that, in some ways, almost feel mythical, and yet at the same time, they were as real as can be. However, because of this bias and favoritism for the giants of old, you often find that smaller extinct animals go neglected, so to speak. I mean, can you name a prehistoric snake besides Titanomyrma or the Vasuki? Or a shark besides Megalodon? A prehistoric canine besides the direwolf? Yeah, you get my drift. And if you do watch my videos in the regular, I hope the answer to those questions were yes, but that's besides the point.
I believe I remember hearing about some, but if you asked me for their names, I probably couldn't tell ya.
The real point is that, in general, we think that the worst scaries are big. Yet, ironically, in real life, it's often the little guys that cause the most chaos. Like, for example,
Cats.
most studies that question which animals people fear the most find that smaller creatures, such as venomous snakes and spiders, are often at the top of the list.
But I feel like it's just because it's more likely that a spider is gonna be in my house than an elephant or a tiger. Like, if I was out in the wilderness and there was an elephant in front of me, I'd still be freaking scared. Just because it's huge, you know?
And in most studies, it's actually spiders themselves that are top ranked. And keep in mind, the largest spider on the planet at its max size is only the size of a plate. So, not that
Holy.
big. And I say only because while this is definitely unsettling, it illustrates how something that is just plate sized can be scarier to many than, say, an elephant. And this leads one to wonder. We always hear about the giant nightmares of prehistory, but what about the little nightmares? And this led me down a path of researching what exactly were the horrors of the past that came in little packages. And let me just preface that some of the things I found were, pretty gnarly. However, I also found that each was gnarly for a different reason. Some looked horrifying, others dished out proportionally devastating damage for their size, and then there were others that blended a bit of everything together. And I feel like a good place to start is a country that is still well known for harboring its fair share of nightmares. And yes, you probably guessed it right. Australia.
Of course.
Yep, the land of nope, as I like to call it, has a lot of questionable creatures even now. Yet at the same time, mixed in there are a few animals that most people are not instinctively afraid of, and actually, which many admire, such as the koala, wombat, and of course, the kangaroo.
Yeah, sure. People admire koalas. I can tell that in my day-to-day conversations with people calling me a chlamydia-ridden koala. No, that they're admired, I swear.
Australia's national animal, which, by the way, actually outnumbers humans, with their population hovering around 50 million.
Bruh.
And this fact might not sound so bad, seeing that they're herbivorous and can be low-key kinda cool, but a while back, 50 million kangaroos would have been a bit more upsetting.
Dude, they look scary.
Well, actually more like a lot, thanks to the existence of a genus known as the Delta, an interesting little guy that lived within Australia from the late Oligocene all the way to the Miocene period. But to be honest, it's kind of wrong for me to call the Delta a kangaroo, as it was actually just a close relative, belonging to the same superfamily, but falling under the more specific group known as the Hypsiprimnodontoidea, a family of marsupials that is still alive today, but is only represented by one living genus, the musky rat kangaroo, which obviously has no relation to rats, but looks a bit like them, hence the name. Now, a Delta, on the other hand, definitely looked more like a kangaroo than a rat, as it kind of stood like one.
The teeth are so interesting looking.
Just with a more low-down crouch, almost giving it the appearance it was up to no good. And let's just say, it wasn't, as despite being no heavier than a pug, it was much feistier and off-putting, as this marsupial was not a leaf lover, but rather a bloodthirster. Or at least that's the hunch. You see, within the skull of every Eccultidelta, there were highly specialized chewing teeth that seemed to have evolved for the sole purpose of shearing through flesh while biting down. And not only this, but they seemed strong enough built to munch on copious amounts of meat as well, rather than being limited to a few scraps. And this was the first good sign that we had a carnivorous kangaroo on our hands. But perhaps it was a scavenger, or at least one can hope. And to that I say, well, probably not. As if you looked just a little over from the chompers, you would have found the mother of all premolars. And what I mean by this is that each and every Eccultidelta had giant oversized premolars that were sharpened to be like spears, and jutted out of its mouth just like, well, a spear. And can you guess just how paleontologists believe that it actually used its teeth? Yep, like a spear. It's thought the Eccultidelta would essentially shank its prey to death, while also stabbing any threat that got too close. So, it'd probably do well in London. Just kidding. But anyways, so definitely one marsupial I'd have steered clear away from, despite it being relatively small. And frankly, if I came across a large group of these guys, I would not find my greater size to be all that comforting. And really, the only silver lining in all of this, besides their size, is that these marsupials did seem to have a more limited range, with fossils being concentrated solely to northern Queensland, where it's believed they hunted snakes, birds, rodents, monotremes, and then even other marsupials. Not a pleasant picture at all. But honestly, the Eccultidelta is rather easy in the eyes when compared to some other little ancient nightmares. I mean, just take a look at the Scolacodons. Yeah, yikes.
Is that an insect? What the hell is that?
And now you're probably wondering, what in the HE double hockey stick is a Scolacodon?
Yeah.
And the answer is a unnervingly common relic of the past, as this term isn't referring to a genus, but simply is the name for the fossilized jaw pieces of predatorial polychaete annelids. In other words, segmented worms. And we actually still have these guys around, as there are still animals like the bobbit worm, who...
Okay, you know what? I don't know much about worms, but this thing, terrifying. I don't like it. I like the colors, the like light rainbow shiver, very pretty. But that's how they get you, right?
From just one look, should be able to tell you why I'm considering Scolacodons to be little nightmares. And animals such as bobbit worms do not only look the part, but they live it too, by doing some pretty devious things, such as burrowing and hiding their entire bodies in soft sediment, from which they then deploy their antennae to detect prey, which thus allows them to stage level 100 sneak attacks on unsuspecting prey, utilizing their razor-sharp mandibles to take out the unlucky and unexpected sucker, before then dragging them back within their burrows. And this all goes down in the split of a second. And let's just say, you do not want to know what happens in those burrows, as it ain't pretty. So now that you know how scary living bobbit worms are, just imagine how ghoulish prehistoric predatorial worms would have been.
I assume they were a little bit bigger, but probably not like super massive, right?
And although this group is still around in some form to fear, the reason why the prehistoric situation was much worse is because Scolacodons have gotten rare in time when compared to previous periods. Meaning, as you go back in time, the might of these worms just grows and grows. And of all the geological periods that come and go, there was a clear point in time in which these carnivorous noodles seemed to be the most common, and that would be the Ordovician, which took place between 486 and 443 million years ago. This was a period of time wherein much of the world was submerged, and marine segmented worms were about as common as flies are today, and you would be hard-pressed to have swam in the ocean without encountering one. Since the first discovery, thousands of Scolacodons belonging to this age have been identified across the entire world, showcasing that the worms of the Ordovician were strong and existing in untold numbers.
And longer than I thought. I thought they were like tiny guys, just sticking their heads out, but they're long. Damn.
And they didn't just reach their peak when it came to quantity, but also when it came to diversity, reaching their highest levels of diversity in history, leading to not just one kind, but a plethora of different ugly mugs to look at.
Thank you. I hate it so much. This is terrible.
You're welcome. However, that being said, because their jaws typically preserve so much better than the rest of their bodies, it is hard to say what exactly these guys look like, as all we know is that, at least their jaws, came in many different shapes. And in fact, they didn't just come in many different shapes, but also many different sizes, with the vast majority of them having been no bigger than 2 millimeters, but a few, whilst not being massive, were pretty dang big in comparison. And so far, it seems like the largest of these predatorial worms, based on their mouths at least, would have been about 6 foot 7 inches or about 2 meters long, giving them a grand total weight of around a pound or about half a kilo.
Whoa, that's a long boy.
So, not large enough to hunt a human, but still plenty big enough to invade our dreams.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. They might not be a danger to us, but they might be a danger to our psyche for sure.
or rather nightmares. And at the same time, there was another group of smaller animals, which were, albeit unrelated, that I would also define as little prehistoric nightmares. And in some ways, they were even a bit like these segmented worms.
Okay, they look kind of cute, not gonna lie. Kind of derpy, kind of cute, but maybe nightmarish is what their behavior is like.
And that would be the Conodonts. Now, if you've been subscribed for a bit,
Never mind, what are those teeth? I take it back.
you'll know that I've taken a liking to this group of jawless marine vertebrates, which once used to be a staple of the planet's oceans, and can pretty much only be summed up as
Ooh.
prehistoric lampreys. Yet, I'd argue that this group was even more unsettling than the present-day lampreys.
I hate the teeth. Okay, without the teeth it was sort of cute, but I hate the teeth.
And why is this, you ask? Well, let's start with the fact that this group had far sharper teeth, which in some cases even protruded from their mouths like some sort of grotesque growth. And when I say sharper, I mean sharper, much sharper, seeing that conodonts are considered to have had the sharpest teeth of any known animal ever, with some species
What?
having tooth-like structures that were not only 300 times sharper than a human's tooth, but 25 times sharper than a butcher's knife, and
Bruh.
1/20th the width of a single strand of hair, leading to the notion that these guys are able to pierce flesh with very minimal exertion. And it seems that across the board, these guys had not only quite the diverse ranges of diet, but also feeding mechanisms, with some possibly, and perhaps unsurprisingly, acting a lot like modern-day lampreys in some sense, essentially boring into the flesh of other marine animals, only this time with the sharpest tooth in existence. So, pretty cool, and kind of scary. As
Yeah.
sadly for any time-traveling scuba divers out there, these little nightmares could grow up to be 1 meter or 3.3 feet long, and stuck around for an excessive amount of time, with the group first having appeared during the Cambrian, 500 million years ago, and only going extinct during the Jurassic, so some 300 million-ish years later. Oh, and did I mention that some evidence suggests that a few were also venomous? Yeah, not exactly an animal you want to bring back to life anytime soon.
So they're kind of cute from above, but when you see below and you see those teeth, you just get nightmares. That's the summary of these guys. Well, they're really interesting though. I'm kind of fascinated by them despite the weird looking teeth. Or maybe because of them.
On the flip side, it is animals like the conodonts, which makes you a bit more tolerant to the fact that we still do have some little nightmares like lampreys, as the alternative seems that much worse. And I find a similar thing occurs with modern day bugs.
Hi guys. If you're enjoying this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you.
Now, many of us may not like certain kinds of them, and often have profuse reactions to feeling one touch us.
I think I'm okay with most bugs existing, except for centipedes and millipedes, and maybe to an extent caterpillars. But with the rest, I'm pretty fine, as long as they're not in my general vicinity. You know, I kind of don't want them close to me, but I'm okay with them being a thing, you know?
But after reading about prehistoric bugs, I am so much more thankful for the ones we got stuck with. And I think a prime example of this is seen with current ants. Sure, some of them can be quite annoying, and also possibly have one of the most painful bites in the world, but you'll still give them a big old kiss when I tell you about the extinct Titanomyrma. And hint hint, the name alone should probably give you some idea
It's
on why
big.
this ant was bad news.
Big.
And it's with this ant that we also arrive to the phenomena that I like to call the little big problem, which essentially happens when an animal that is relatively small compared to most things becomes horrifyingly horrifying because of how much bigger it is than what we are used to. And let me tell you, you can see this quite clearly with the Titanomyrma, who for now is the largest known ant to have ever lived. Found throughout Germany, the US, and even Canada during the Eocene, this
Germany mentioned! We had the monster bug! Yay!
little, not so little ant was known to grow to the size of a hummingbird. Oh, and like a hummingbird,
bird?
it had wings as well. So yes, the
Aw.
largest ant ever could fly and had a wingspan that reached over 6 inches or 15 centimeters long. So just imagine ants the size of little birds buzzing
Ugh.
around you. Now with that said, I should clarify that the wings do seem to have been restricted to only queens, so there is that silver lining, but really this lining is quite thin, because while not deadly, I'm sure many of you know that getting bit by an ant isn't exactly a pleasant experience. So now imagine how it would feel to be bit by one whose pincers were the size of an entire common black ant's body.
I don't know if I've ever gotten bitten by an ant.
And to make things a little bit more dicey, there is a current debate on what it ate, and the emerging idea is not pretty. Now, one
Rats.
possibility has always been this ant was a leaf cutter, using its mandibles to snip them greens apart. But further research has proposed that in reality, these ants were related to the living African driver ants. a genus of army ants who are known to march in columns of up to 20 million strong and are considered genuine threats to people, namely those who are disabled or who would struggle removing themselves from danger, such as children and infants. And let me establish the obvious. These guys are tiny compared to the Titanomyrma, who might have also marched out in similar armies, raiding various areas, nests, and taking down genuinely large animals that they strip to the bone before then carrying on their march. So next time you come across an ant in, say, your garden or on a picnic table, instead of squashing it, maybe show a little bit more hesitation. And honestly, many bugs fall into the same bandwagon, with dragonflies being the classic example, because while not actually being dragonflies, we do have their giant look-alike, the Meganosoptera, amongst other giant buzzing insects that swarm the prehistoric swamps of the Carboniferous, all the way up to the late Permian. Although, like I said, these guys are pretty much the classic example, and so a good chunk of people have heard about them at least once, or seen them in some documentary. But trust me, there are plenty of other nightmarish extinct insects that I highly doubt you've heard of. And one good example of this are the roachoids. Given their name, you may be thinking that this is a group of extinct cockroaches.
Yes, that's exactly what I was thinking. And I was imagining them to be like, I don't know, like freaking jacked. Like on testosterone. They're like huge. They have muscle. They're going to the gym 5 days a week. That's what I imagined.
On roids. And that is a good, logical guess. But technically wrong. Because while this extinct group superficially did resemble them, they were something different, albeit not that different, being now generally considered to have been the forerunners to what would one day become modern-day cockroaches, termites, and mantises. However, if you saw one, roaches are the only thing you'd likely confuse it for. They first appeared in the fossil record during the late Carboniferous, and seem to have lived a lot like cockroaches as well, with their diet likely mainly consisting of dead plant and animal matter. However, where they started to get a bit more AO compared to modern roaches is when it came to delivering babies. You see, nowadays, roaches use ootheca to have their kids.
Wait, I didn't know this. I've never had roaches. This is horrible. This is the worst thing I've ever seen. I'm being traumatized here. What the fuck? This is so bad.
Which are essentially sacs that contain the eggs of the insect. However, roachoids, on the other hand, did not partake in this. Instead, they had ovipositors, long tube-like organs that they used to inject their wee little babies into various substrates and food items, a bit like maggots. Meaning we're talking about a reality where you would never know if a slightly old piece of plant material, meat, or something else, was housing a roach infestation. And the other issue with this lot, which made them a bit more uncomfortable, was again the little big problem. As on average, these guys were absolute units, with not one, but multiple species being similar in size or even larger than the current largest genus of roach alive, the Megaloblatta, which hails from Central America and South America and is about the size of, well, your entire palm. So, I personally shudder to imagine a bunch of these guys roaming about, injecting everything with their babies like a face hugger, from which they would then erupt like a chest burster.
I hate it too, thank you.
Plus, just like the Megaloblatta, most not only had wings, but were also capable flyers. So, I'll leave the rest up to your imagination. And moving not so far over, from a taxonomic standpoint, there was a relative of the roachoids that I'm quite glad are gone too, and that would be the manipulator, which surprisingly is not named such because it manipulated my feelings to make me feel horrified. Nope, rather, this guy dates back to the Cretaceous period, some 100 million years ago, and was essentially a mix-up between a cockroach and a mantis, at least looks-wise. And the funny thing is that despite looking arguably less like a roach than the roachoids did, the manipulator was actually a legitimate cockroach. And I don't mean that as an insult, being a real one, just not like any alive today, as this thing was built if, literally. It had long legs, an elongated neck, sharp mandibles, and then, just to finish it all off, a super flexible head that could freely rotate. And so, what does this all mean when you put it together? And the answer is, apparently, the Cretaceous had a predatory cockroach problem on its hands. Yeah, a cockroach that ran around hunting things. And I don't know about you guys, but I think cockroaches, when they aren't hunting things, are already scary enough.
Yeah.
Thankfully though, these guys were a bit smaller than the roachoids, being just under 1 inch or 2 centimeters long.
Okay.
Though, to be honest, still not a comforting thought since this implies that predatory cockroaches is well within the realm of possibilities for evolution. No bueno. And something else that isn't a comforting thought is piranhas. You know, those carnivorous fish that travel in groups, have wicked sharp teeth, and can devour entire food items in mere seconds.
And they're so pretty. Anytime I look at piranhas, I'm like, wow, they're so sparkly. Aw, why did they choose to be such feisty little monsters?
And are voracious enough that they even got their own horror movie, Piranha 3D.
Damn.
Yet, no living piranha, no matter how frightening they are, can stand their ground, or I guess swim their water, against one genus who is now, thankfully, long gone, and whose name was simply the megapiranha. 9 million years ago, within the fresh tropical waterways of prehistoric Argentina, this fish reigned near supreme, being a piranha, or rather Cerassalmidae, like no other. On paper, it did share certain common similarities you tend to see in extant piranhas, such as the same general body construction, and its appearance overall was quite generic for a piranha. Yet, its body size was a whole different story. As not to beat a dead horse, but this is once again a situation where something that is usually known for being on the smaller side was just a tad bit too large for comfort.
Oh, they were
And when I
that
say
big?
tad, I mean a lot. Now obviously, even nowadays, piranhas can inflict some pretty impressive pain for their size given their razor-sharp teeth, as well as mobbing behavior, with there having been cases where people have lost fingers, toes, in extreme cases, even died after being swarmed. And this all happens despite piranhas typically being no larger than your hand. So then, imagine what happens when we look at the megapiranha, where we are suddenly talking about a genus where your hand could have literally fit in one's mouth, as matured individuals measured nearly 30 inches long, or 2.5 feet, making them the longest known predatorial cerassalmids, and by far the heaviest, with megapiranhas weighing in at 22 pounds, or roughly 10 kilos. So yeah, this creature was inarguably terrifying, as it had everything that makes its modern counterpart scary, except in this case, that everything was just worse. Take their teeth, for example. They weren't only razor sharp and larger, but ridiculously powerful, even for its size, as it was backed by a super efficient jaw that let it bite with a force of nearly 3,000 newtons, possibly more, which, by the way, is greater than the biting force of a full-grown tiger, despite it being,
Holy.
30 times smaller.
A
And given the
fish.
shape of its teeth, this power went a long way as well, with one study that reproduced its teeth finding that a megapiranha was likely able to penetrate the femur of a cow, the shell of a turtle, and the armor of various catfish species with a single
Whoa.
bite, leading to the notion that this little fish was mainly interested in big catches, if you get my drift. And what's more, is that the design of the teeth were made to ensure maximum pain no matter what you were or where it bit you. As on contact with flesh, the stress would be most directed along the tips, allowing it to slice through copious amounts of meat like butter. And then if it hit hard bone, cartilage, or some sort of armor, that stress would then start distributing equally amongst the base of the teeth, allowing it to keep biting down and start gnawing through your bones. So, not a pleasant way to go.
Amazingly designed though. Good job, nature. Mm-hmm.
And it was seemingly so capable of killing that opposed to modern day piranhas that usually prowl in shoals, it is believed to have been a solitary killer, as no need for backup when you can gobble a cow femur on your own, which also perhaps makes it a bit less scary, but I'd rather not test that hypothesis.
Yeah.
So evidently,
I'm not fighting a mega piranha in the waters. But okay, after watching so many videos about the sea creatures, I'm not entering the water, to be fair.
this fish was one scary goober. But what about when it's not just one thing in the pond that brings the terror? Instead, it's everything in the pond that are tiny nightmares, where being small and nightmarish isn't the exception, but rather the darn rule. And as it so turns out, such a pond, or rather time, actually exists, as perhaps no other period fits the bill of little nightmares better than the Cambrian. Now, we already know that the farther you go back in time, the weirder things seem to become. And seeing that this period played out 500 million years ago, life back then was downright alien. And a lot of this had to do with an important event that had just transpired, the Cambrian explosion, in which a sudden radiation of complex life led to major diversification amongst nearly all realms, and was a time when virtually every major animal phyla first appeared in the fossil records. And being the progenitors to many, just about everything alive during the Cambrian was not only beyond primitive looking, but also in many cases just downright disturbing.
I think after seeing these images, I feel like Spore had a point with its character creator. Like back then I used to think it was kind of goofy, but now that I'm seeing all these creatures that existed in the past, I'm like, it wasn't that far off,
And then also to fit the bill, tiny too. In fact, one of the largest known animals from the entire time period was just about 2 kilos or 4.4 pounds in weight, the Anomalocaris.
It's cool
A very
looking.
odd-looking arthropod that was a voracious predator for its time, being one of the earliest known examples of an apex predator, armed with 2 versatile appendages that let it grasp and manipulate prey. And this little terror was actually just one member of the diverse order known as the Radiodonts, which themselves fell into an even broader class known as the Dinocaridida, that housed other freaky groups such as the Opabinidae, with their proboscis-like appendages, and then the Carigmacelidae, which had horizontal appendages used for capturing prey but were lined with numerous disturbing spikes and rods, giving these guys looks that could kill. Seriously, if I was wading in the water and felt one of these guys touch my toes, game over. ExtinctZoo is now extinct. And they weren't the only ones to avoid with their toes, as you also had the Lobopodians, which I like to refer to as worms from hell. Mostly because a lot of them look—
No, okay, you guys know I don't like things with too many legs. This is one of them. This is messed up.
like if you touch them, you die in some very horrible manner. And the most iconic amongst them were the Lucingenia and the Aishea, and were also both residents of the same place, the Burgess Shale within Canada. And though both of them definitely make you go WTF, I dare say they're not actually the craziest of the lot. I mean, you also had the ExtinctZoo, a monstrosity full of tentacle-like appendages, lined with bristles and spikes along its back.
This is the worst one so far. It's so gross looking.
Making it look like it crawled out of Stephen King's The Mist. Then there were similar members, like the Vtuber, or genera that might as well be cosplaying a swimming moving cactus, such as Diania. And then, if somehow none of this was enough for you, there were members like Face of Vermis, who seriously might as well have inspired the facehugger from Alien, as it had a superficially similar looking body. Although I will say that in reality, it was a bit less scary, doing less jumping at faces and more rooting itself in the ground whilst waiting for tiny food to drift on by. But honestly, I'm still glad that 500 million years separates it from me. And the same thing goes for the Onychodictyon, plus many, many, many more.
This one's kinda cute, but just because of the face. I bet in real life it wasn't that cute.
After all, like I said, this period had nigh endless amount of animals that looked like they could play a monster in a sci-fi movie. And I haven't even yet started talking about an entirely other separate group, known as the Morellomorpha, which could superficially pass for a trilobite gone wrong, which makes sense since they are somewhat related to the trilobites, and likely lived a bit like them as far as diet and niching goes, just much scarier looking. And so, this is all to say that while it's the big giants that might have us running away in our nightmares, I think it's rather the little horrors that truly get under our skin.
True.
Thanks for watching, and until next time on ExtinctZoo.
That was really cool. I definitely felt like the last ones with the many legs were the most gross ones, but also that footage of the roaches giving birth will haunt me in my nightmares tonight. So that's great. Another great video by ExtinctZoo. I hope you guys enjoyed. Thank you for watching.